Laguna Niguel, a quaint town in Southern California where the sun shines bright and the people are always nice. Unless you ask questions about nepotism, conflicts of interest, unusual city spending, public sector employee behavior, illegal gift card donations, bribery, HOA fraud, developer kickbacks, landslides, wildfires, arson, and more. Nobody knows what happens to those who ask about these things better than former Laguna Niguel Mayor Sandy Rains. In her first interview since leaving office, Free Laguna Presents Sandy Rains. Online now at freelaguna.com. Sandy, this is your first interview, right, since you've left Laguna?
It is, yes.
Can you kind of walk us through why you left?
Well, my family and I moved to Laguna Niguel, and we thought that was going to be our forever home, and we loved it. And we had been there for over a decade, and I made the decision after I was asked to run for city council. And the first few years we were, it was fine. I ran for re-election. It just seemed that in this last election, a lot of things had changed. And I noticed that our community was changing as well. And it just didn't feel like the same community that I had moved to over a decade ago. And as I was bringing up concerns about things that I felt were important to keep our city fiscally sound and to make sure that we were moving in the right direction, I was getting a lot of backlash and a lot of hostility. And anyhow, so it just felt, for my family's safety and protection, it just felt like the right thing to do. And we had decided to put our house on the market. It sold really quick, and we haven't really decided where we're going to land, but I felt like it was the right time to leave.
There were some unusually tense moments on the dais in the months before you left. Could you address some of those?
Probably the most tense was the one that made the most news, I guess, was the evening when we had the city manager on for review. And it happened to be the same night as the city attorney. I had some concerns as I was working more closely with her regarding some expenditures and things and policies that were in place and how that was going about. Unfortunately, I never got to share that with my colleagues in closed session because they bullied me out of the session and didn't want to hear what I had to say.
The mayor unilaterally put performance and dismissal of the city manager on the agenda. This is definitely a retaliation for having the city attorney on the agenda. This is so very wrong. This is bad leadership. I am mad that we're having this conversation.
The request by the mayor is a perfect example of retaliation. It's irresponsible, unethical, it's bullying, and it's not how an organization should be run. This is not the way I will tolerate governance here in Laguna Niguel.
All of this reeks of an attempt by Sandy Rains to bully the city manager into resignation. And I will not sit here quietly when one of our employees is being mistreated.
So at that time, I realized I really didn't have much to offer because no one was going to listen. And so I just kind of backed off a little bit because I thought it was better for the community for me to back down than it was to create more drama and chaos at that point. However, my colleagues chose not to do that. And so it just became more and more evident that it was becoming hostile at that point. And once that happened, I had no other communication with any of the city staff or city manager. And so it was really becoming difficult for me to perform my duties as an elected official and to serve the community that elected me.
First of all, I would like to publicly apologize to our city manager. I was given bad legal advice, and I'm not going to go into our closed session, but I learned a very valuable lesson in there, that sometimes things are different than what they seem, and I took the inappropriate advice that I should not have taken. So I also want to apologize to my colleagues for my behavior, and I would like to apologize to our staff. Our city does deserve better, and I will accept whatever the consequences are of my actions, because I feel that's the right thing to do when you're an adult and you make the wrong decision.
There was the one situation where, and you said you had bad advice. Do you want to address that at all?
Well, everybody's talking about, that in the moment that night when I apologized, I wasn't really apologizing because I had done anything wrong. I want to make sure that that's clear. I didn't feel that any of the actions I took were wrong. I was advised to move forward with my concerns with the city manager on that night, so I did. It had absolutely nothing to do with my colleagues wanting to review the city attorney. It just had been that we're gonna have a closed session, so I felt that it was an opportunity for us to discuss everything at the same time. Maybe it wasn't the right time to do it, I don't know, but for me it felt like it was the time to discuss concerns that I had because I saw us going in the wrong direction.
In 2017, there was a similar situation where the mayor at the time, Jerry Sluswitz, was called a bully. And I believe two different council members called you a bully. Is that right?
I don't know if so a lot of rumors and a lot of stories have gone out. I haven't been called to my face a bully, but I've, had a lot of people share with me that people said I was bullying them, and I'm like, I don't know how I did that. I was never confronted by anyone saying that I had done that. I'm not bullying anybody, and asking for information so that the public's aware of what's going on with their tax dollars is not bullying, in my opinion. I think a lot of people would agree that, bullying is an ongoing behavior towards somebody that is destructive. And I wouldn't describe myself as that type of a person. I have never been disrespectful to any of my colleagues. Unfortunately, they've been extremely disrespectful to me behind the scenes and publicly from the dais. So if anyone was going to say somebody was being bullied, I would think it would be the opposite.
One of the council members in a public meeting stated recently that you and Rishi Sharma coordinated everything.
It would have been better, and I would have most likely promoted an election if the two council members who had recently resigned had exited a little bit better. For example, if they had cared about the residents and the residents' voice, maybe they would have coordinated their exit like they coordinated everything else up here, but they didn't.
Was that the case? And is that even illegal to work with someone else on the...
Well, you can work with another colleague to bring things to the dais. I'm not quite sure what coordination, former council member Sharma and I would have done. You can't make any decisions without the majority vote of your dais. So if you have something you want to bring to the agenda, I believe that council member Sharma and I maybe brought 2 items to the city council in the 2 years that we served together. So I don't really consider that to be coordinating. I think it was a couple items that we brought. I don't know what coordinating they're talking about. It's not the first time that 2 council members would do that. As long as you don't have 3 council members involved in something, there's nothing wrong with 2 council members working together to bring forward an agenda item.
In kind of getting involved in reporting on California politics, I'm learning how complicated and almost impossible the Brown Act is to follow. It's so complicated and difficult to stay within, I think, the bounds of what you're allowed to do, Do you think that maybe that's almost intentional so that city council members are at the mercy of city staff and city attorneys?
I don't know. I don't know who or why the Brown Act, it's the only state that has a rule like that, as far as I'm aware. And it's, in some ways, I think it's to protect the public and the taxpayers, because you don't want council members making decisions behind the scenes on a regular basis, without public discourse and public being aware of what they're doing. So I think it's to protect the public in a lot of ways. On the other hand, there's a lot of ways to circumvent the Brown Act, which is obvious that, what transpired in the last probably 6 months is been, utilized. So if you look into the Brown Act, it's not just necessarily 3 council members speaking to each other, but it's also them having coordinated efforts with other people that can communicate information to them so that they're all on the same page on something. So the city manager could easily give the information she wants to certain council members and not other council members. That information could be given to a community member who then gives it to all the council members so that they're all aware, to get to the same decision. So it's very difficult to prove or to show that somebody's violating the Brown Act, but it's also, it's there to protect the public, but I don't know that it necessarily does protect the public, because there's so many ways to circumvent it. And I think that in a lot of ways, that happens more often than not.
So the first time I got involved, I think, in the city council, the nepotism debate, who would have known that the city mayor at the time, her son was going to become a city council member to take her seat? Can you talk to that at all in terms of like the nepotism debate and what all that was about?
Yeah. It wasn't something that I had brought up. It was something that Council Member Sharma had brought up. I had no idea that he was bringing it up. He brought it up at a council meeting one night during his comments. I guess he had an incident with a colleague that made him really feel like it was important to bring it up. The only thing that I did at that time was say that if there was a concern, that it was something that we should obviously look into and make sure that we had a policy. What I found really interesting about it was that my 2 colleagues, the former Mayor Genoway and the current Mayor Jennings, both voted not to move forward with that. But when the actual policy came out in April, they were the first ones to agree that it was a good policy, and they made the motion to approve it and to second it. So it became a very controversial thing that a lot of people actually gave myself and Councilmember Sharma a lot of flack over. And in the end, there was a policy that was adopted. Many other cities took a lead on that and used the information that we had to adopt their own policies. So I think that having a conflict of interest or a nepotism policy is an important thing for all agencies to have, so that we make sure that we are protecting the taxpayers that we serve. So I don't know, sometimes things become very controversial and then at the end they're resolved and you realize that it was a good thing. So sometimes it's just what it is, and unfortunately that became a big controversy for, I see it to be no reason. Maybe it was because the former mayor's son was going to be running for council. I don't know. I have no idea what the reason for it becoming so blown out of proportion as it was. But I think in the end that the council collectively did the right thing. Kevin
Innes was the attorney at the time for the city. And how much did he charge for that investigation, which appeared to be mostly a Google search to see what other cities did for their nepotism
Well,
policy?
it's interesting because the cost of attorney fees and attorney costs seems to have been like the big thing that was brought up about this. It was $10,000. And in the, former Mayor Jennings has quoted on public record as saying, in the grand scheme of things, $150,000 isn't a big deal. Yet over $10,000, this became a big deal. So, if a city pays $10,000, whether it was for a Google search or not, or whatever, I don't know. I think that Mr. Ennis did his job to the best of his ability. If you're going to spend $10,000 to save the city, possibly millions, if there's a potential lawsuit or conflict or problem or something that arises down the road, I think that's a small amount of money to spend of taxpayer dollars in comparison to what the potential issues that could come about are. So it's I guess it's a personal opinion. Some people think, oh, that's a lot of money, and it is for a lot of families. That's a lot of money in a city with the $57 million budget at the time. $10,000 was, not even, it was a small percentage of our budget, and we had an attorney on staff that is there to protect us and to do that kind of work. So I feel like it was the right thing to do, and I think that, like I said, at the end, the council voted unanimously to approve a conflict of interest policy. So it must have been the right thing, or it wouldn't have been a unanimous vote.
City attorney issue has been a curious one for this city hall. Many municipalities and cities will hire their own staff versus hiring a firm. Can you speak to how and why Laguna Niguel chooses to hire a firm versus sourcing their own?
Well, from the inception of Laguna Niguel, it was created as a contract city. So with the exception of the day-to-day employees that we have to do the day-to-day operations, the majority of things that we do in our city are contracted out. For example, we contract out to Orange County Sheriff's Department. We don't have our own police department. Many cities have their own police department. We also have Orange County Fire Authority that we're contracted with, as opposed to having our own fire department. So it's not uncommon for cities that are contract cities to also have a contracted attorney for attorney services. And that would be the reason. We did for many, many years have one attorney who served the city, and he was, even though he was the only attorney we had for almost 30 plus years, he was still considered as a contract employee. So that's not uncommon, and a lot of cities do that. As a matter of fact, most contract cities have contracted attorney services.
The exit of Chris Newmeyer as city attorney after he was just recently brought on was part of the unusual situation where it was implied that you were bullying. Can you speak to his exit and the replacement firm BB&K at all?
I think that Mr. Newmeyer was a good attorney, and his firm represented our city well. Unfortunately, there were colleagues who didn't support the hiring of that firm in October, and one of them was current Mayor Jennings and former Mayor Genoway. So it wasn't a surprise that they would, that the new dais that came on board would be pursuing finding a new attorney very shortly after that, especially when they knew they had a majority to be able to do that. I don't think it's anything to do with Mr. Newmeyer's or his firm's experience or expertise. I think it was a personal decision, and I also believe that there was some connectivity to the new firm, BBK, that was preferred. I guess that's the word I'm going to use, preferred. I had concerns about them because I felt that they had conflicts of interest with serving Aliso Viejo and San Juan, which are both contiguous cities to Laguna Niguel. And they also represent Molten Niguel Water, which is our water service. And so I was publicly tried, Mayor Jennings tried to publicly shame me and saying that I didn't understand what conflict of interest is, but I wouldn't be hiring the attorney that represents someone who else I'm doing business with if I'm going to need to, at some point, maybe I will never have to, but if I do at some point need representation against that particular entity or business, I wouldn't want the same attorney because they would know everything about my business or my operation, and who would they be loyal to? So maybe other cities don't feel uncomfortable with that, but my biggest concern was the fact that it was our water district and the same firm, and then also two of the contiguous cities. I don't know anything else, I guess I do. I think the other thing that I had a concern with was there was some closed session comments that I had made, which I'm not going to share with you because they were in closed session, that led to some changes in the way the contract and the proposal for BBK changed on the second round, because they also were interviewed in the first round. And that made me concerned too, because I felt like there was something going on behind the scenes and I was uncomfortable with it. So, once that happened, it was really clear to me that there was nothing that I was going to be able to do in that environment to make sure to protect the city. And I didn't feel like I would have representation through the firm. So I don't know anything, other than my own research that I did and my own information that I have, that to make me feel like I want to, I guess I don't want to say much more than that, other than it was an uncomfortable feeling, and I felt like there was things that happened behind the scenes that got us to where we are, us to where we were at that point, and that's not, something that I was comfortable with.
So you're saying that you made a comment in closed session that was relayed to BB&K?
It had to be relayed to somebody, and I don't know, because things changed. So it's public record that they applied at the first time that we were looking for a firm, and that they were not offered the contract that Alshire Winder was. And at that time, there was some comments made in closed session. Then when Alshire Winder was put on review, so it's on public record. When firms apply, when RFP is put out, a request for proposal is put out, the firms send in their applications and they're posted online. It has to be public. At that point, the council decides who they're going to interview. Well, then we interview the firms, and from those interviews, we select someone. So that process was done back in September, and we hired Alshire Winder in October on a 3-2 vote. So at that point, Alshire Winder started. They were just getting started, and they were just doing the work that they needed to do. So there wasn't anything that I saw that was inappropriate for them. So then when that happened, and the new council got elected, it was obvious that they would have a majority to remove that firm and get the firm that was preferred by the other two council members prior that were not part of the 3 votes. It was also said in the closed session with the new council members that the exact same application that was submitted in October was submitted this time around by BBK. And there were some other details that I can't share because they were in closed session. But those are the public records. That application changed from the time that that closed session meeting happened until we actually interviewed the firms. And then the firm BBK was hired again on a 3-1 vote because 3 of the colleagues wanted BBK and I voted no. My reason for voting no was because I had concerns on the conflicts of interest. It's nothing personal. There was too much conflict there for me to feel comfortable. And there was another qualified firm that we could have hired. So I think Laguna Niguel put themselves into a bad situation by doing what they did so quickly, because the first time when we sent out an RFP, we had about 11 proposals that came in. This last time we only had 4. So less and less people wanting to even put their name in the hat to represent the city. So that's not a good road and path to be on. So we were very limited. And you know, my colleagues got exactly what they wanted, so that's fine for them, but it wasn't okay with me.
How do you feel about this potential lawsuit against the city of Laguna Niguel to force it into a district election system versus an at-large system?
Well, it seems like it's been the standard that's happened around our surrounding cities, so I'm not surprised to see that it's happening to Laguna Niguel at this point. I do believe that there's a variety of, you know, people, backgrounds and nationalities. I mean, I'm a Greek immigrant daughter. You know, my former colleague was, you know, Indian. We've had a Persian mayor on the council. So, I mean, I don't think that we haven't had representation of what's collective of our city. I think that the lawsuit states that it's Latino. So I don't know if there's been any Latino interest in running for city council in Laguna Niguel or not, but if they choose to go to districts, then I think they should use an independent group to do the districts so that it's fair. But I really don't have much else to say about that. It seems like that's what's happening throughout all of California cities, and so it probably is something that's going to occur. And I'm glad I'm not there to deal with it.
Well, one potential reality is that aside from actually encouraging city council members to represent a specific area, we will have a more personal interaction. Like I guess I'm trying to say, I see it actually as being a positive. At-large elections can be swayed if a few streets really pull together. That's the criticism that I've seen about them, is that they can be swayed by a minority that's just more active.
Well, I think in a district election, what happens is you've got, you know, each council member represents a smaller base of the community, right? So whether it's done for cultural, ethical reasons, ethnicity reasons, or whether it's done just so that you have more representation and a key person that you can talk to, I think it could be a positive thing in that regard, because then you have that one person and one council member can focus on maybe 10 or 12,000 residents instead of 67,000. That might be a positive thing. You know, the other part of that is when you're making decisions on a city council, a lot of them affect everyone regardless of what district you're in. So, like, for example, the budget. If the budget is going to be approved, the budget is approved based on, you know, the overall city, not just one district. Now, there could be issues with that because maybe one district wants their roads fixed more frequently than another district, and maybe a council member won't vote for something on a budget that doesn't include some kind of street maintenance in their area or whatever. I'm just giving that as an example. So it could create some issues as well, but at the same time, it allows one council member to have representation of a smaller group in a community. So it could be positive and there could be negatives. So
I'm curious how it's going to affect the election cycle. If we were to switch to a district, who would pick which one goes first?
What happens is whoever's already elected will finish their term. So if they had a 4-year term, even if it goes to district in this upcoming election, then the people who have their 4-year term, which I believe is only 2 people right now, they would continue their term, and they would be the person in those districts. Similarly to when we changed our districts for the county supervisor seat, we had kind of overlap representation for a moment until after the election. And so then on the next election cycle, it would be all districted. So every single person, including the incumbents who had a 4-year term, and then the 3 new people who got elected, they would be elected by district. So it usually takes about 2 to 4 years for the cycle to completely turn over into a full district election. I think what's different about it is it allows candidates to focus only on their district area. So there's a lot less walking on those beautiful hills of Laguna Niguel.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, so I guess for the candidates, it would be a good thing.
It would be required that anyone that is elected to a district has to be a resident of the district, correct?
Absolutely, that's how it works, yeah. So that's the whole reason for districting, is that the person is elected that lives in that district, correct? So if you had multiple people who lived in the same district, so for example, you have a current person living in the district and another one who's on the council, and then the election season comes, one of them is not going to be able to run. Well, they could both run, but only one would get elected. The top vote getter of the 2 of them would be the one that would win the seat.
Gotcha. The selection of your replacement is currently underway. How do you feel about 21 applicants are going for your seat on the dais? Apparently, the interviewing process is going to be each one of the 21 gets 10 minutes in an interview. How do you feel about that?
They have big shoes to fill. Maybe that's what it is. So I was the top vote getter in both of my elections, and one of the highest vote getters in the city. So I would just say that there's a lot of people that have probably started to see things. Usually when you don't have a lot of complaining, it means that there's probably not a lot going on. But in the last 6 months, there's been a lot of changes, and it's not been positive, and people are starting to hear and see things that they don't care for, and there's more people getting involved. So I think it's great for our democracy because it shows that people are finally opening up and going, wait, we need to be involved, we need to start paying attention. So I would hope that the 21 people who applied would not just apply for the position, but also continue to stay engaged and continue to be involved and to make sure that they're holding their electeds accountable for their decisions that they're making right now.
I wanted to go back on the May 2nd, your last meeting, which was the one that seemed to get a little personal. there was a lot of discussion about the experience of BB&K. Do you know some of their experience? Because we found some interesting experience that I'd love to share with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear some of their experience. Everybody talked about how they represent so many Orange County cities, and that was the big reason why we had to have them, and they're a solid team. But I know that they just recently were let go from San Clemente because they didn't, they were charging them a lot of money and not serving them in the best capacity that the council members felt that they needed to be served. So, not every firm is perfect. Everyone has, their wins and their losses. No one's ever going to be 100%. But I personally didn't feel that they were the best choice for our community and our church, our city. So, but I don't know of any other, I don't know. Obviously, my colleagues seem to feel like their experience was outstanding. So I have some questions that aren't in the contract. During the interviews, I wanted to seek some clarification from the city attorney that about conflicts of interest, because they represent two contiguous cities as well as our water board. And I don't see, and maybe I'm missing something, I don't see anything in the contract where there's any kind of signature where everyone has released their conflicts of interest in that. Is it in the contract or not? Did I miss it?
Those provisions aren't in the contract.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't mean that the city and the city council doesn't have some ability to address those issues when and if a conflict of interest under State Bar Rule 1.7 were to arise. The city council, if there was a situation where there was a conflict of interest under 1.7, in order to continue with that representation for either Laguna Niguel or one of the other clients of the new city attorney's law firm, they would have to get what's called informed written consent from both clients in order to represent both or either of those clients.
The city of Laguna Niguel, for the first time in a long time, will have quality, experienced, stable, not an interim, legal representation to take on the many challenges we face.
And I respectfully disagree with your viewpoint on this. BB&K does not have a conflict of interest in representing our city. You can play that game and speculate and make assumptions that somewhere down the line in a highly unlikely scenario there may be a conflict. And if that happens, we have rules of professional conduct that help guide us on what to do. And every situation is a little bit different.
I know you throw around conflict of interest very loosely. Our attorney has assured us this is not an issue. There's what-if scenarios that are going on, but I do not see an issue. We are getting competent legal advice from a very strong attorney and attorney firm. We have had a compromised city attorney before, and we have the legal bills to prove it. You said that you got bad legal advice from the previous attorney, and we incurred thousands and thousands of dollars in legal bills for that. Now you're saying this firm is causing us a conflict of interest. You don't seem to understand what that means. And I'm not willing to sit back and have you badmouth them and say that there's issues when there aren't issues.
I would appreciate if you stick to the facts instead of attacking me personally. I think it's really disrespectful. I'm not attacking anybody personally here. I'm bringing up a concern that I have, and that's it. So I appreciate if you would stop attacking me personally.
Concerns were talked about, and I don't feel that there are any concerns moving forward. So do we have a motion on this item?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Motion carries 3-1.
BB&K represents the city of Laguna Niguel and Moulton Niguel Water District. As we're now learning, Moulton Niguel Water District is also the employer of Kelly Jennings, the mayor of Laguna Niguel, who voted for BB&K. La Paz Road in Laguna Niguel is collapsing. There's discussion that Laguna Niguel may be in a lawsuit against Moulton Niguel, a situation that has completely validated Sandy Rains' questions. And another great example of why it's a terrible idea to share a law firm with adjoining cities and entities was demonstrated by BB&K, who represents the city of Santa Ana in this document discovered from 2018. BB&K indicated there would be adverse consequences to their representation of other cities, including they may be tempted to favor the interests of one or more of their other involved clients, and their judgment to Santa Ana may be impaired and clouded by their relationship to other cities. BB&K also stated they may be disinclined to present the appropriate positions of Santa Ana, and that their forceful advocacy of their client's position, including as among the co-defendant cities, might alienate other clients. In a county like Orange, where you can't go 10 feet without stepping on a lawyer, why is it so difficult to find one that puts Laguna Niguel first? Well, speaking of conflicts of interest, BB&K previously represented Todd Spitzer, the employer or lead district attorney over Ray Genoway. But now that was a few years back. But that was one of the interesting things that we found. BB&K also represents Molten Niguel Water District, which is, I believe, the employer of Kelly Jennings. One of my favorite discoveries was that BB&K was the law firm for the city of Bell. Not in representing the city in their criminal trials, they actually were the city attorney firm doing the worst prosecuted corruption case in California. I have to be specific when I say worst prosecuted, because that doesn't necessarily mean it was the most corrupt, even though they were pretty corrupt. They were just the ones caught. Now, granted, that attorney, I think his name was Lee, he's out, obviously, of BB&K. He did not survive that with the company, but that's an unusual thing to keep in mind.
Well, what's interesting about that is I think one of the reasons that my colleagues were so interested in hiring that firm was because of the deep bench and all of the different resources that they had available to them through the entire firm. So when you're hiring a contract city attorney, you have one who's one sits there at the meetings with you and does the day-to-day work with the staff, but they are also utilizing the resources of their firm. So they're not just one individual, they're like all the firm. And so that's interesting to hear that they represented the city of Bell. I had no idea.
Yeah, that actually resulted in criminal prosecutions for those city officials, elected city officials, which was, I believe, at one point, city council members were making like $800,000 a year. Yeah, so that situation, that's interesting that the other members of the firm help out. So BB&K may have been more involved in the day-to-day ongoing issues with Bell while they were committing these heinous crimes. Now, BB&K even had to pay the city of Bell, I believe, $2.5 million in a settlement for their negligence in representing the city at the time. Now, under the unusual argument that the city officials said, well, you were our lawyers, we thought you would tell us if it was wrong to pay ourselves $800,000 a year. Right. It's just as soon as I found that, I couldn't believe that's who we were fighting over.
Well, I do think there's a lot of, the firms that represent municipalities, there's obviously a lot of connectivity between them and different council members and different city managers and city staff, because, as people move around, they've worked with different firms and had different opportunities to meet with people. So I don't know. I mean, maybe the familiarity with maybe some of the people who work for the firm was one of the reasons my colleagues felt comfortable hiring them. I don't know. I didn't have that familiarity, and my big concern was the conflicts of the two contiguous cities and our water board, so our water district. So, and
BB&K actually has a pretty vast history of working with water rights situations. In some instances, in one city, it looks like, I think in Claremont, they tried to take over the water board and failed. Now, don't quote me on that exactly, but that was something. And Claremont was a city that I believe our city manager, Tammy Letourneau, also worked in, correct? Do you know that?
I do believe that's true, yes.
And another interesting thing was that BB&K was also the law firm involved in a scandal in Yorba Linda, California, in 2006. That scandal was the city council was involved with a developer, and including a quid pro quo situation where if the developer hired a group of thugs to intimidate citizens trying to stop a development by getting petitions signed, then the city would continue to give exclusive developer rights to a group. This was brought to light by a whistleblower who was one of the developers who came forward with emails, notes from meetings, and one interesting thing was in that situation, the city manager at the time was a woman named Tammy Letourneau. And we're still waiting to get the final investigative reports on this, but apparently the city had initially included statements in a final report exonerating Tammy from any involvement, and they removed that exoneration language, I believe, on July 7th, 2009. Again, we're still waiting on the final report to confirm that. However, what we do see is that we have BB&K and we have Tammy Letourneau in a previous situation where developers' rights were the developers were granted special access and privilege to the city over the citizens. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm not anti-development. Obviously, I think that, planned and appropriate development that matches character and integrity of the community is important, and that we constantly have to move forward. I feel like the best way to do that, though, is through a transparent process, working with your residents and your taxpayers, because it is their community and they should always have a say in it. So I probably would be opposed to anything that's taking the residents' voice out of it, because I think that's the most important voice. I know we had a controversial project this past year in our city with the landslide area, and I know I did vote to approve that, and it was because after all of the questions and the extra time that was given, the facts came back showing that it was an appropriate and safe way to move forward. But I gave every resident the opportunity to talk and to share their opinion, and I gave them extra time because I feel that we should never be trying to shut down the voice of our residents. So I don't know that I would agree with what happened. Obviously, it was at a time that I probably wasn't involved in Orange County politics, because this is, something new that I'm hearing about. But I don't think that it would be appropriate to not have residents' voices heard or to try to shut them down.
The purpose of the petition in Yorba Linda, I believe, was to force any new major development to be placed on the ballot versus allowing the city council to just approve that. That seems like it might be something that would be good for the city of Laguna Niguel. How would you feel about supporting that, even though it may fly in the face of state law?
Well, I think that at this point, I think it would be a waste of taxpayer money to try to push an agenda like that, only because the state laws that have been put in place now supersede all that. So the taxpayers could spend a lot of money, the city could spend a lot of money to put this initiative on, and the voters could say, no, we don't want something. but the state law supersedes the municipal law, and then they could come down and do what they want. For example, if private property is not given the rights to do what they want at this point, there's something that the Sacramento legislators have put in place called the builder's remedy, where a builder can come in, and as long as they do high density, low income housing, they can come in and do whatever they can do it, regardless of what anyone wants or thinks. So at this time in California, with the current state laws, I think Laguna Niguel pursuing something like that would just be futile. And it would just be money spent on something that isn't going to be beneficial. I think it would be more beneficial if a council was open to having community groups and listening to what the community really wants and trying to come up with a good collaborative way of developing future plans and not keeping things secret from them for too long of a period of time. That way the community feels like they're part of what's happening instead of learning about it after it's already been, authorized and approved or getting to that. I mean, part of the process, the EIR process, requires public meetings, but sometimes waiting till that public meeting time is even too late for some of the community. They want to know about things way before that process. So I think that would be a better way to do it.
I'm personally affected by the landslide, so I have a bias in which I don't want my family to slide down a hill for condos. So,
I appreciate that. We can respectfully disagree.
Yeah, I'm biased. What can I say? But taking out my own desire for survival, it is an unusual situation that we have Sacramento coming into planned developments like Laguna Niguel and dictating their brand of reality onto ours. I mean, the initial plans for Laguna Niguel, I believe, were that we would have 33% open space, right? No matter what.
Yeah.
And now that's being encroached on. Now, we're getting these sort of massive apartment complexes that are a little out of control, and the citizens, not just of Laguna Niguel, I think the entire state, especially the suburbs, are starting to feel as if the goals of the people are not in line with the goals of the state. And this...
I would have to agree with that. I think that the goals of why people want to live in California or why they choose to live in a place like Laguna Niguel was because of its beautiful topography and its open space. And, they chose that community for a reason. We chose it for that same reason, because of its topography and its open spaces. And when that starts being jeopardized, I think that people do start to think what's going on, what's happening. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter whether I agree with my colleagues on other things. A lot of what's happening in the development world today is happening because it's being forced by Sacramento, and most of the time the council members' hands are tied and they have to approve projects, and some of them can be approved without ever coming to city council. As long as some cities have already by right things in place, and as long as they meet certain criteria, projects can be approved and they never even have to come to the city council. I don't think that's the case with any major development in Laguna Niguel at this time, but that would be something to pay attention to on what is being approved within the city council, because staff's pretty creative in creating agenda items that sound really great, and then they're not so great down the road.
Yeah, I like that city staff is sort of this blank, faceless thing, which actually ends up coming from people like Tammy Letourneau, who has a history of working with developers over the rights of citizens. This is a concern for me. again, because of my own survival bias. So I'm learning that about Tammy and her previous situation with Yorba Linda. It seems as if we're bringing in the syndicate that was used to create that system. Oh, and we have a town center development here. What a coincidence. So there's almost like a group of people. Okay, one of the campaign guys that was hiring, I believe, the 250-pound gorillas like Che Guevara or whatever. His name was a guy named Dennis DeSnoo. Do you know Dennis DeSnoo?
I don't know him personally, no.
Dennis DeSnoo is apparently a kingmaker in Orange County. He was a consultant, a campaign consultant for every one of the city council members in 2005 in Yorba Linda, I believe. And then a lot of this comes from excellent reporting by a journalist named Jim Drummond. Dennis DeSnoo was also a consultant for previous Laguna Niguel Mayor Laurie Davies, Robert Ming, I believe John Mark Jennings, and Elaine Genoway. And so we have the family members of some of his consultancy on the dais now. We have the law firm that looks the other way for cities like Bell, and seems to also, by the way, BB&K is also linked to the United Nations. They work with them on water right issues. That's a major concern for me, because I think we're all realizing that the WHO and UN organizations are not necessarily friends to the United States and the citizens of the United States, especially families. And so now we've also got the first Democrat with Stephanie Otto in quite a while on the board, and she made a comment two meetings ago about how the state doesn't have enough water.
And we're running out of water here in California.
So we have a person from Molten Niguel Water District. We have a law firm representing the city that deals extensively with water rights. I can't help but wonder if there is a looming intentional water shortage coming to the city of Laguna Niguel. I have speculation.
Water's been an issue in California for as long as I have lived in California. Personally, I find California having a water issue as a big misnomer from poor leadership in the state, because we just had record rainfall in our state this past year and none of it was captured. That could have, solved water issues for a decade probably if it was captured appropriately. And then we have desalination plants being built instead of just, having the right capturing of water. It's been an issue. Water is a big moneymaker for a lot of people in the state of California. And what I have found since being elected is that nothing that happens in California is about what is right and walking in integrity. It's about who makes the most money and who has the most control. So that doesn't resonate with who I am as a person. And so that was probably another reason why I looked at where I was and said, I'm not here to make money. I was here to serve and to do what's right. And as you peel back the layers and you start seeing more and more of the same people involved in multiple different areas, you start realizing this isn't really about getting results. It's about having control and who can make more money. Our homeless issue is one of those. It's becoming $1 billion industry, and homelessness keeps increasing instead of decreasing. And yet people are making, multiple six-figure salaries to be homeless advocates and to work in the homeless industry and to work in the building industry to build housing for homeless. And the housing isn't being built, but the people are making money saying that that's what they're focused on. So unfortunately, it's a big circle, whether it's water, whether it's finding housing, whether it's development. It's all about who's making money and who's getting what they want and the control and the power that they want. So unfortunately, I never believed that Laguna Niguel was that city. I always, loved Laguna Niguel. I raised my kids in Laguna Niguel, and it was our home, Unfortunately, that's not how I view it anymore. And I, being the person I am not going to continue to walk being who I am and knowing what was coming and watching the decisions that are being made with how the budget was being spent, not paying off the pension obligation from 21 when you still have, or from 20, and still not knowing what you owe for 21 and 22, and starting 23 with new staffing. All of those things were really big concerns for me. And I would look at those things and what was being promoted and what the direction we were going in. I was looking at it and going, it's not going to be long before Laguna Niguel is on the same path as some of the other cities that are struggling with their finances and with the ability to take care of things that they need to take care of. And the state, had a surplus 2 years ago. They were bragging about the big surplus they had, and now they're in a deficit. Where do you think they're going to come for that money from?
Right.
So water is just one of those things. The other thing was converting everything to electric. We don't have a grid that can handle an entire electric state. So why not fix the grid and the infrastructure first before you start forcing legislation on people to do those things? Those are all the issues that on a macro level, are happening. And then here we are in Laguna Niguel on this micro level, and we're being forced to comply. And then we have people who are elected who think it's all great and are moving in that direction. So it's an unsustainable way of doing business. And as a business person, I wouldn't run my business that way.
No, there was a very small path for me to grow my business, so I actually shrank it to just be myself. The state is a terrible state to do business in. It is, it can be bountiful in done the right way, but it is such a headache. Just the, signage that you have to have, even if you're like a creative entity, like it's overblown bureaucracy. And I don't know how to fix that. It seems like it has to collapse on its own.
Yeah. I think you had asked what were some of the other reasons. One of the other things that I had a big concern about is and I brought this up at our April 18th meeting. I was asking, we had increased the number of on-call vendors that we had in our city. Originally, when this happened in 2019, we had 12 vendors, which, is a normal thing for a municipality to do, so that the minutia of day-to-day things doesn't always have to wait for a council meeting to approve something, and it gives the city manager authority to go ahead and sign to bring in an on-call vendor to take care of something in the city so it can be done. And that was fine. And then in 2021, when the contracts were up, the amount of on-call vendors went from 12 to 31. So it more than doubled. And, at that time I had voted for it thinking, okay, they're qualified vendors, not understanding the whole process of how it all worked. And then in 2023, just recently in April, we had an increase from 31 to 46 on-call vendors. The concern that I had when I brought it up was what was the procedure for spending money, and this goes back to as long as somebody's making money, it doesn't matter. Well, the procedure is in 2019, then Mayor John Mark Jennings had brought forward an item on the agenda. It was when I was first elected to City Council, changing the policy, allowing the city manager to increase their purchasing power up to $50,000. Well, that's fine because you can still do that. But now you've got not 12 vendors anymore, you have 46 vendors. So that's quite a bit. The question that I asked, they said it was all budgeted. I specifically asked the city manager about the policy, and she explained to me that the policy was she couldn't do anything over 50,000. But when I went back and looked at the policy has a second part of it that says that the city manager can do amendments to the contracts for these vendors, and as long as they don't exceed 50,000. However, if the overall amount exceeds more than 50,000, that's okay too. So we have a city manager now who really could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars without ever coming to the public eye or to the city council. That's where I had some concerns, and I was bringing those questions up, but I wasn't getting the answers. And I did find some documentation where in one day the city manager signed for 2 different contracts with the exact same vendor, both right under the $50,000 mark, because they were 2 different contracts as an amendment. She was working within the 50,000, but on the same day signed off to spend almost $100,000. So if you look at, those are the ways that people get away with things, and policies that sometimes get written that you think, oh, this is a good policy because it's going to help the day-to-day operations of the business of the city get done. But then you look back on it and you go, to what extent is that going to happen? And in our case in Laguna Niguel, it's happening at an exorbitant extent, because there's vendors that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars that never come back to the city council. So that's another example of concerns that I have. And also when we're doing budgeting, how the budgets may allocate money for certain things, but it doesn't directly tell you where to find how that money was spent or who was signing off for that money.
Interesting. Now that overage, or what's the term you use again? Or on-call vendors?
Yeah, on-call vendors. Yeah, so they're approved on-call vendors. They're people who have been vetted, who have the right licensing, the right type, haven't had complaints, and that they actually do a certain job. But like, which ones are being used? Like, is there a consistency? Like, there's a couple that I uncovered and found groups that were getting excessive amendments. There was one group that had 23 amendments to their original contract. And if you add up the 23 amendments over the 2-year period of time, it was close to $1 million.
Wow.
All signed off by the city manager, except for maybe 3 or 4 that came back to city council.
This system of approving overages became an issue, I think, in 2017, correct? With Jerry Slusowitz?
Actually, it was, I think there was an issue. I think that issue might have been a little bit different. I think that they found that that at that time, the city manager was spending money and using resources for his own personal benefit. In this case, the policy was updated after I was elected. Shortly after I was elected, it was updated. The council all was for this policy, and it just created a policy that allowed for amendments to be made and increase the amount that could be spent. Before it was $25,000, it went up to $50,000. So I think it was a response to fixing something that had happened in the past, but in hindsight, what it did was it also opened up the opportunity for city manager to have, the ability to spend way more than her $50,000 or his $50,000 per time, because they can do it through an amendment process.
Right.
And if you talk to anybody who works for any of these vendors, they'll tell you that this is typical, that they know they're not going to finish the job for the $50,000, but they write it for that, and then they come back and say, oh, we ran out of money, we need 30 more, and they intentionally write it for under that amount so that they can keep getting business.
I think we actually may both be right. Yes, that city manager had gotten a vendor was doing basically personal work on his house, maintaining landscaping or something. But also that same vendor had gone from a $50,000 budget to over $500,000 budget, I believe. I think I've seen these records. So it was legal.
So now they have a policy which doesn't make it illegal for the city manager to do what they're doing, but is it ethical and is it transparent?
Right. So if you get caught breaking the law, you just change the law.
I think that's what happened.
Okay. Now, and it's interesting now, John Mark Jennings, the one that codified that change.
Well, he was the mayor at the time, but the entire council voted in favor of it. Me being a new council member and deferring to my senior colleagues and what they said, so I went ahead along with it. I didn't come out of the gate like my new two colleagues did this year.
Right. So you bullied everyone with an agreement vote. So it's interesting that John Marks Jennings wrote that only because his wife is now the mayor. And that, again, goes back to the nepotism thing. People have a problem with nepotism because it makes them feel the system is rigged against them.
Well, nepotism's definition doesn't apply to elected officials, apparently.
Right.
So just so we know, the legal definition of nepotism does not apply to elected officials because the voters have a chance to vote and they get to make that decision.
Right. So, the district situation may, if we do a district vote, that may clear up and fix this potential.
It could fix some things, yeah.
Issue, right? How do you think the situation where developers, where you have developers on one side and citizens on the other, is there a better way that it could be done so that we have less of these NIMBY situations? Because I love well-designed things. I love good architecture. I like proper development, but I also like,
Yeah. To be honest, I ran 2 campaigns and I got elected twice. I walked a lot of doors. I knocked on probably just about every door in Laguna Niguel at some point or another. And I would tell you that the number one thing that I heard over and over and over from Laguna Niguel residents was, we like it the way it is, we don't want any changes. So even with that being said, I think the best way to do it is what I had talked about before, is better community collaboration ahead of time, even prior to an EIR, before the public meetings are required or mandatory, that there's a better way of communicating with and offering information to the community to let them know these are some of the ideas, which ones are you in favor of. The best thing, and I've always believed this to be the case, is that good collaboration and excellent communication are the key. And people will support that which they believe that they were part of creating. So the more we communicate, the more we do community events that share ideas and let them know what's coming and give them opportunities to engage in what they'd like to see happen in different areas of the community, whether there's a developer involved yet or not. I think it's important that people have an opportunity and a space where they can give their opinions and voice what they'd like to see. And then through that collaboration, you can have ideas of what the community wants, and then you can use that to plan for the future, and you can also use that to create policies for the future. So in January, when I was the mayor, I had held a brainstorm session, and it was an open meeting for the public to come forward and share what they wanted to see. And I got so much positive feedback from the community, that they felt like that was a great opportunity for them to come and just share what they wanted and give their opinion. It was a 9 a.m. meeting, and I think we had something like 26 public commenters. That was more commenters than we had a regular evening meeting. And then that gave the council an opportunity to hear all of what the people wanted, and then utilize that information to create the strategic plan. Now, unfortunately, I don't think that's what happened. I don't believe that the current council took a lot of that information and utilized it for the future, for that strategic plan, and that strategic plan now has been adopted, and I'm sure the budget that's going to be adopted next council meeting will reflect the strategic plan that the colleagues that are left on the dais want. But that's how you correct it. That's how you start, is you allow the community to feel like they're part of the process, as opposed to just telling them this is what we're doing, or using the excuse, well, this is what Sacramento is requiring. If you take what Sacramento requires and you figure out a way to put that together, it really can make a difference. I'll give you an example. One of the roles that I had when I was still on council was I was a regional council member for SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments. And we recently had a presentation about walkable communities. And one of the key things that the surveyors and the people who did the study found was that people are not opposed to development, as long as it's not more than 5 stories, and that it has character, and they had an opportunity to participate in what it looks like and what it offered, right? And like some of the stick buildings that are just all concrete straight up, they didn't like that. They wanted it to have character and design and style. So it's not that the community doesn't want things, they just want to be part of it. So that's what I would recommend. I just want to go back and say this. I've been accused of a lot of things, coordinating with a colleague, or, quid pro quo, or any of those things. And, acting on behalf of the community for the right reasons, and wanting to make sure that the public is aware of what's going on, is not a bad thing. And I stand behind my decisions. I'm not ashamed of any of my decisions. And I feel like the accusations that have been made against me had more to do with political persecution, and not really truth. So I hope that the community of Laguna Niguel does prosper and move forward. I wish everyone in the community the best. And I want to thank everyone who voted for me and supported me throughout the years, because it was a true pleasure and honor to serve all of you.
That's great. Oh, I do have one last question. Do you have a preference in who takes your seat?
I do not.
I've spoken with a few.
I don't even know who the 21 people that applied are. So
yeah, that's. I think we'll get a good person regardless of the situation. Although the 10-minute long interview to decide our fate is funny.
When is the interviews?
I think they're going on now.
Oh, they are right now?
Or like this week.
This week, okay. Well, good luck. I hope whoever it is puts the city of Laguna Niguel first and not their own agenda, but we'll see what happens.
Great. Thank you, Sandy.